right, second meeting of the Cartography Sync. I think that everyone's at home today at the beginning of all this unfortunate craziness going on in the world. And we have some, let's see. So today what I was thinking was, we'll just play it by ear. There's not too many of us today. I was thinking that we would first open it up and talk about some issues and PRs that you guys wanted to raise up. And then after that, I was thinking of doing some housekeeping and talking about things that we did over the past month and some things that are in progress as in terms of PRs, issues, and discussions going on. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
Cool. Yeah, so are there any PRs or anything or issues that you guys would like to talk about? I know, Marco, I think I didn't read through it yet, but I saw that you posted in I guess a follow-up for that G Suite thing.
Yes, that was just earlier on today for me. I spent some time troubleshooting it and basically ended up finding a working setup that works for RBAC Sync. I don't know if you're aware of that project. It's basically a project that syncs role bindings in Kubernetes by fetching Google Groups. It's basically the same concept, fetches membership of Google Groups and applies some rules. And the setup that tool requires is exactly the same as cartography. So I managed to get that working, and so the setup is working. Try to apply the same setup for cartography and it's still failing.
Oh.
So the other thing I tried then to use the service account I created for testing cartography and passing to RBAC Sync, and RBAC Sync works fine. So the setup, I'm pretty sure, is now complete, but there is something still missing, probably some permission. So I need to go deeper into that.
Well, thank you for investigating that. Let's see what RBAC Sync is. Let me just go look at that. Oh, that looks like it's a cruise tool, huh?
Yeah.
Custom resource definition. Okay, so it pulls stuff from G Suite, and I guess like the setup is very similar to cartography, but then it works in RBAC Sync, but it doesn't work for cartography.
Yeah, correct. It's the same. Then that tool does something else with the group membership. Basically applies roles to Kubernetes, but the fetching of the data is probably the same concept.
Okay. Let's see. Were you able to get a hold of Dean by any chance?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Yeah, that's something actually in my to-do list.
Yeah, I would probably, like, you can just add him in the channel or ping him directly, or one of the whichever makes most sense. He's probably got the most context on the G Suite stuff, and if he's too busy, then we can go take a stab at it as well.
Sounds good.
And so we'll look at that, dig in a little bit, find out what that difference is in the RBAC Sync. Okay. Any other issues or PRs? Yeah, well, I know that one's kind of been dragging a little bit, but then yeah, let us know what Dean says, or if he doesn't respond, tag us, and then we will dig in and help out.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll do.
Cool. Well, if there's nothing else on that, I guess I will. Let's see. I don't think that there's any Q&A here, since everybody over here knows how to use the tool very, very fluently. Yeah, what I kind of thought for the Q&A part was, like, if people had trouble setting it up, or if people had trouble using it, and philosophy things, that kind of deal. But anyway, I will go ahead and present this window, just kind of go through some housekeeping. Okay. All right, so in terms of, let's just count some of our victories in terms of issues that got resolved. We had this issue of GCP buckets. The bucket syncs were failing because we were trying to get the labels on them, And then what happened was, I think we were trying to get it as a tuple, and Neo4j didn't like tuples. And the reason why we had never caught it before was because none of our own test data had any labels, and I guess the for whatever reason we don't have that internally, and then so this never crashed for us until Max at Unity tested it, and then so the fix was pretty straightforward. You just add labels to the integration test data, rerun, and then actually make sure that it all works. And so that was a pretty quick win. So thanks to Max for that. There were some small updates to the docs that we made about like broken links. And, you know, kind of like last month, I said that within the 1 month time span, just trying to keep ourselves honest, what did we say? We said that with things interested in the next month, we wanted to have documentation to deploy and integrate in different environments. This is, I guess, kind of a half complete type thing. We added more documentation, we organized it pretty well. Different environments, not so sure about that. Some of that is going to be accomplished with the new. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more with some of the Docker discussions that we've had. And we also said that we would have wanted to have runnable examples on security scenarios. This did not happen this past month. There's again, like I'm gonna get back to that again when we talk about later on about some of the Docker discussion that we've had. And let's see. The thing that there's some interesting new issues that came up, and let's see, what was this one? Yeah. So Marco, you brought up that DynamoDB sync fails, and then I kind of went on a wild goose chase a little bit, trying to figure out, maybe it's a permissions issue, and digging in on like getting the right metadata for Boto, and this took a bit longer than I wanted it to, but then it turned out that so thanks for this repro, first of all, because what we found was that it worked for kind of all of these things except finally for this AP East one. And then the special thing with that is that that's a opt-in region, and this is essentially the same repro for the same issue that we had with this issue from Daniel's issue with opt-in regions on storage buckets. So yeah, you have like this ME South one, and then this fails because you have to opt in on that one. And so this is something that, well, we'll have to dig in a little bit on, well, first of all, I think that for DynamoDB, we can probably add in something that will do the opt-in process. For S3, we can probably do something that will add in the opt-in process. And as we better understand it later, maybe there's a way to do it more generically across all of those different providers, maybe not, but then we'll try to start with a Band-Aid and then iterate on that and then abstract it later. But this is an interesting one. Opt-in regions, yeah, so those two are related. And then some discussion on threading and parallelism. And then I've kind of talked a little bit about these kinds of issues before. So there's this new issue from Revenium about I have tons of AWS accounts and it takes me forever. And so can you do this all threading in a parallel manner? And essentially my reply was there's some nuance there, right? Because there's some data dependencies, and then you need to have some idea of failure tolerance in the sense that if you have, so the solution that we've talked about using DAGs for this, where you would have parts that don't have data dependencies, they can run parallel. And then if there's a failure at any one of those points, then it's like, okay, well, nothing downstream is going to be affected by it. and we have to define what those DAGs are going to be. There's a number of different solutions and different products that we can use to make that happen. Number of different approaches we can use also. Stalebot got aggressive and then said, we're going to close this. And I think that this is worth keeping in the back of our minds, just showing that, yeah, we're aware of it. Yes, this is a big flaw, but we are working on it. We are, well, committing to it for the near future, because this is a pain point of ours. I think that for us, because this tool really needs to scale, I think that for us, our own sync, the AWS portion of it takes about 3 hours also, if not maybe even where I think we might be hitting on 4 hours now. And yeah, that's definitely not acceptable, especially if you want to have larger shops using it that have hundreds of accounts, for example, or thousands of accounts even. And yeah, so I'll keep that open. Oh, feel free to interrupt me at any time, by the way. Don't want to just, yeah. And again, like I mentioned earlier, providing sample data, we're still behind. And then, so what was this one? I want to play with sample data. Yeah, so this is still in progress. And then, so I wanted to kind of keep this. This is sort of related to, I'm kind of doing like different bug fixes and paying back different ideas of technical debt. So what happened was, I kind of got ahead of myself here. So AWS DNS cleanup. I ran into this bug where I'll just show you what this does. So as you guys know, what cartography does is that we will ingest an object and then we will assign a update tag to all of those nodes. And that tag is the same tag of everything in that sync. And so that'll be tag 123, or for example, for that timestamp. And then what that means is that we will then clean up all of the nodes from the previous run that have not been updated, all the stale nodes. So let's say that old timestamp was 111, for example. So then we will delete all of those things, and so that way we keep only fresh nodes there. So in the case of DNS, how this worked was, let's delete everything that points to a DNS record that does not match the timestamp that is the freshest one. And this is problematic because what it does is that, well, there's that whole, I guess, best practice in software engineering where explicit is better than implicit, right? And then so this is one case where it kind of shoots us in the foot where, for example, internally we have extra modules that work after the standard DNS work. So we'll have other nodes that point to DNS records. And then so what happens is we delete all of these, like everything, even though that these different node types were not involved in this AWS DNS sync. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, I see your point now.
Yeah, so this works if you make the assumption that there are no other modules that touch or have this relationship with a DNS record. And then so the fix here is to be very explicit. And so what did I do? The fix that I went for that is currently in progress, and then I've been kind of decently randomized. This is wrong. This code is wrong, by the way, but the idea is there. So the idea is that we want to, so first of all, this was a painful process to identify. I had to identify all of the different labels that we create that point to a DNS record. So the idea here is that we are trying to match on explicitly all of the different labels that point to an AWS DNS record and then delete those, not just a wildcard delete. So everything that occurs self-contained within the AWS job. And the reason why this one isn't working, it isn't correct right now, is because this will do the delete if all of these labels match. I want it to be or. I want this to be an or. I don't want this to be an and. Right now it's an and. So in order for this to actually do what I want it to do, I have to have something that has that. This just isn't going to happen. So I'll just do that. And then in the middle of fixing this bug, one of the things that I've been trying to do is pay back some technical debt by creating, I guess, let's see, there's some also a couple things like doing a safe substitute on like yeah, because like the old way of doing it had just some generic thing there. Again, be explicit. And the thing that I wanted to fix here was having some sample data. So I did provide some sample data on like new AWS DNS stuff, and then also having integration tests to ensure that you would have things like this is like the transformation step, but the part that I want to show up is connecting it. Do I have it? Anyway, basically the idea is that you're going to ensure that these labels have this relationship connected to this thing, test that that connection exists. So that's kind of that's the idea of trying to fix back a problem like that, pay back tech debt, be explicit, be yeah, little by little. We're trying to get there. And yeah, any questions so far?
So far, so good for me.
Cool. And so the thing that came up that was interesting was this discussion about Docker that came up in the past couple days from I think Coinbase, and I don't actually know if shame that they're not here, but well, first of all, like want to thank what are their names again? Do you guys know off the top of your head? I guess in chat that's NS and Dylan. So so a little bit of history. Back when we first open sourced, maybe about in April or maybe March even, so about last year, there were a couple of different Docker PRs that came up for cartography, and we still are trying to figure out this whole open source thing. And back then we had a lot less time, a lot less people. We still don't have that many people to work on it, but then at least now we have a community, things are getting better. And one of the problems there was the community suggested that, hey, we would like to have some Docker PRs. There would be a lot of benefits to having cartography run on Docker. Will you be willing to support that? And the problem that we saw there was we don't use cartography in like that same Dockerized setup, and then so the problem there is that if you create a Dockerized container or a solution that was opinionated, the problem was that it would not be normally used by us, and you would have divergent deployment or code paths. And then so there was a big risk of code rot, and then the Docker solution would not get the care and attention that it would deserve. And so rather than do that, we decided to be very focused on simply the software package of it. And then we figured that if somebody cared about having Docker, then it would be relatively straightforward to consume our software package and then put it in their own container and then handle all the things like, I don't know, perhaps making it a submodule or just consuming those changes. Obviously, I think Dylan and NS, they made the case for, we'd like to not maintain our own fork, and it's very cumbersome to need to consume new changes from cartography. And then this is a blocker for us. We've got these great ideas, and it's hard for us to contribute back. And there's enough feedback in those discussion channels saying, we'd like this also. So, now that we're a year in, and then we have a number of new people, new contributors, and we're at the point now where if there is a problem with any new Docker solution, then we have enough eyes on it to say, oh, this thing doesn't work anymore. Somebody please pay attention to it. Somebody please fix it. And so with that in mind, if there are enough people passionate enough, clearly there are enough people passionate enough about having this feature in there, I'm willing to absolutely support and work together with putting that together. Um, for full disclosure, though, the parts that Lyft is most familiar with and will probably give the best support for is the software side of things, software side of cartography. Uh, Simply because, well, that's just the closest to what we've been doing and how we yeah, like full disclosure, like the way that we consume it internally, we use it as a sub module internally, and then we do I think there's documentation in there about how to do a custom cartography sync in the dev documentation somewhere. That's how we do it. We take the sub module and then we consume cartography as a Python library. So internally we don't run the command line tool, and then we have something that runs as the roles that we need it to, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but if somebody else wants to add their own Docker solution, include it in, by all means, absolutely. Taking care of Neo4j, it's kind of a pain sometimes, so I totally get that. The only risk there too, another thing to think about is adding in all those different credential stories for all the other providers other than AWS. So things like having GCP and Okta and whatever. But I figure, not being able to do everything perfectly at once, that's not really a reason to not get a little bit of functionality at first. I'm so, if there's, like I said, I'm supportive, and yeah, that's kind of my thoughts, and then that's kind of where we're coming from on looking at Docker.
So on this one, I see both sides to, as I probably was saying the first time, also for us, we run everything as containers on Kubernetes. So it was basically a blocker, not having a container. So what we did is basically creating a Docker file, pulling cartography from pip install cartography, having that simple as that, a very simple container, just pulling the Python package down. And then with the container, then just creating a manifest in Kubernetes and using the command line, the arguments to run cartography. So I see people having like problem and not having containers. So two things you said, Alex. The first one is, are you planning to also provide support for Neo4j or just cartography? Because I think Neo4j can be considered as completely separate from cartography, and there are Helm charts already pre-made for deploying Neo4j. So what's your view on this?
What do you mean by support for Neo4j?
Basically, do you want to create Docker files also for packaging Neo4j, or Docker files just for packaging cartography?
Just for packaging cartography.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it could become very, very, very problematic then to maintain Neo4j. So yeah, that's like, because from something I was saying before, I wasn't sure.
I love the question. To play devil's advocate, I think one of our major blockers is getting up and run. Even if you made the Docker file only for cartography, if you could then have some Docker compose file, like something where you can get a one command line, gets you Neo4j cartography all configured together, and you can get this thing running in one command, is pretty nice. I agree we should not base our Docker file off of Neo4j. It should be as slimmed down cartography as you need, but something. I mean, it gets you into Helm chart versus Docker Compose land.
Yeah.
And it could be sort of V2 of this effort, but even getting Neo4j installed and up and running is a huge blocker for people to adopt the tool.
But just so I understand, what we're talking about is, well, what I'm saying is that the solution should be you have cartography and you have Neo4j on the same Docker thing. I don't know Docker very well. Is it a Docker Compose thing? But basically, the goal is that a user is not going to install Neo4j themselves.
Okay, then you could base the Docker file off of Neo4j. So it's all one container, cartography and Neo4j all in one container.
Okay.
Or you can have separate containers, one for Neo4j, one for cartography, and then you have to use something above that, either Docker Compose or Kubernetes and Helm, to then instantiate both containers. So yes, you do get into tricky land when you try and start doing this.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, Alex. Okay, so personally, I would avoid putting everything in one container just because it defeats the purpose of containers. So, and there is, for example, even from Docker Compose or everything, you can reference the official Docker image from Neo4j and just pull that down, and nothing to maintain on our side, basically. So it simplifies a lot.
Also, how does that work? You have a container that just does cartography stuff, and then that talks to another container that contains Neo4j.
Yes, right. So that's the point, is using an overlay to make the network connection available. So basically present the DNS names to each other, basically. So if you use Docker Compose, you can create an overlay and tell to cartography, reference the Neo4j container using hostname Neo4j. And then Docker Compose is going to automatically route the traffic between those two. Similar for Kubernetes, basically.
So that you would use Docker Compose for the single instance. You're running this on your own machine, or you only have one machine to run it, then you can put them both on. For us, we wouldn't use that because we already have Neo4j running. So we just need the cartography Docker container to point to our existing one. So it gives you both options. And it does seem like open source has not made a call on this yet. I see Helm charts, I see multiple Docker containers in other projects, and I see Docker Compose. So I think step one is create a cartography Docker container. Step two is figure out how to make the single instance spin up learn cartography really simple. And that probably includes all that sample data. It probably includes some type of compose script. And gets it all running all in one command.
Is there a way to pin it, or I don't know what the right word is, but to ensure that cartography is talking to a specific version of a Neo4j container?
Yes.
Oh, cool.
You can use tags or commit hashes. Yes.
Awesome. Let's see. Yeah, if you don't mind, Andrew or Marco, if you guys can maybe chime in on the thread with NS and Dylan, or maybe put up a new thread talking about your thoughts on separating it out like that, because I think that the current proposed solution is to keep it into one container, and I don't have the experience with Docker.
Okay, yeah, I missed a part of one single container. I'm gonna double check on that. Cool. Because I missed the conversation. Yeah, but then the other thing you were mentioning, then a whole another set of problems are gonna come from secrets. As you said, cartography needs AWS credentials, G Suite credentials, GCP credentials. So there are multiple ways to get these credentials to cartography. So not everyone is going to be happy because we use Vault. Someone else can use Secrets Manager. Depends where actually people are using it. So that's another set of problems that probably is version 2 or 3 of this iteration. But it's something at the point you'll have to think about.
Right. Yeah, that's one of those things where we'll be aware of it, and then we will, I guess, cross that bridge when we get there. And then when their pain point exists, okay, we'll fix it then. Yeah.
I agree also with Andrew. Starting in a Docker file could be a good point to start, and then build on top of that.
Yeah. But then, again, like I said, trying to manage expectations, the path that we are most familiar with supporting is strictly the software part.
Yeah. Well, for that, I can provide my help for that. I do Kubernetes all day long, every day.
Oh, awesome.
So that I'm happy to assist you with this. That's not a problem.
Well, very much appreciate that.
No problem.
And then let's see. Andrew, did you add in AWS IAM to assets?
Yeah, I just wanted to let people a heads up that this is something that I will spec out first. I don't have a great chart in front of me, but if you think of cartography now, we have all of this IAM information about roles, about users, EC2 keys, everything that exists in IAM land, we have in cartography. And then over on the asset side, we have a good amount of assets in cartography. But traditionally, there is no linking in between them. So questions like who has access to my S3 bucket is a question we can't answer. We don't pull in detailed policy information. There are a good number of projects out there that will answer that question from the other direction. So given this role, admin, what can it access? So this is a massive project for cartography, but opens up a ton of things. Yep. We could, at the full solution, parse all policies, find out where those policies map to, and then for all permissions, create a line, right? That is infeasible. That's just not possible to do. There's like 34 operations against S3 buckets. If you were admin, that would be 34 relationships to every S3 bucket. Yeah. Right? That just would overwhelm our graph. Certainly, probably anybody with a sufficient size in AWS, it would overwhelm them. So we have to be pretty smart. And I think the first key is to look at one, resources on the right side that we want to track. S3 buckets would be a huge one. And then permissions that we think are important. So we want to map get object to S3 buckets, right? And look at how many relationships that would create. And so I hope to build the piece in cartography, first spec it out. I'll bring it back to one of these meetings so we can talk about it and it makes sense. Cool. The ability to have a standard set, like you probably really care about get object on S3 buckets. That's a pretty big one. But in general, you can then define your own list. So if you are a company that uses RDS quite a bit, then you can map your own permissions to RDS instances. So you say, I want to map create table in RDS. Then you just write in that mapping. I don't know exactly how that piece works yet, but you write in that you want to map this object or this permission for these assets, and cartography will do that mapping. So that if you had a particular thing you were trying to burn down, Dynamo access, then you could write in those things, you could get the graph, and then you could spit them back out depending on your performance requirements. We have tried this before on a larger cloud instance, and it blew up pretty hardcore. So we do have to be very selective. But also to teach some people, like, hey, if cartography is teaching a lot of people about security in the cloud, and we're now saying you really need to care about get object on S3, you need to care about get item in Dynamo, you need to care about these things and who has that type of access. So it's a major project that I want to take on, especially because Lyft definitely needs to be focusing on this a hell of a lot more. So I'll bring that back. I just wanted to get people thinking about it, and that this is one of those graph problems that's seriously difficult to solve. But we actually, from a network standpoint, we already pull in the policy information. We just don't do anything with it. So we actually get all of the raw policy data in the cartography sync, We just don't parse that policy data and figure out what it can do.
One
So
thing,
thought I'd add that out there.
Yeah.
And to expect some stuff coming up on it.
Another thing to take a look at is I think Evan had a PR there from like last year about expanding IAM wildcards. Have you seen that yet?
No, but this would include that.
Yeah, so he did some work on, well, he didn't do IAM role to asset or anything like that, but he did IAM role to IAM role. So like you can specify a wildcard and then so it will expand it. And then there were some, I guess, there's some issues that I had with the PR itself. There's a couple of different things that it deletes or something like that, but might be worth looking at. So it gets you the IAM to IAM.
Right. It is a hell of a problem. If you saw reInvent, AWS released the IAM Access Analyzer, but it's really, it's a start. I like that they're doing it. It is a significantly difficult problem to do. So we'll probably start really small.
Right.
Get object on S3 buckets. The other one I wanted to bring up, which we've been talking about internally for a long time, is right now we pull metadata from certain APIs, primarily AWS, GCP, other ones. We don't do any active exploitation, and we don't touch assets except for a few cases. So mostly we talk to control planes of information, of cloud services for control plane metadata. We have wanted for a long time to expand that out a little bit. And the first one that we want to do is DNS queries. When Evan was still around, he had a lot of objections to this being in core cartography, but we already bring in DNS information. And so we already know what CNAMEs are out there on your DNS, and we can verify that those CNAMEs are still correct by issuing a DNS query. So it would be against the DNS server that's configured on the cartography box, wherever you're syncing it from. And then we just query DNS to see if that CNAME still exists. If that CNAME doesn't exist anymore, then we know you have a hanging CNAME, which in OAuth and other redirect issues becomes a security issue. So while I'll start with just CNAMEs, it is also a broader discussion to think about of where cartography's lines are. Obviously, we're not going to attack any resources. We're not going to try and exploit anything, but sending out some DNS queries is a bit of a departure of what cartography traditionally does.
I'm going to
so the plan
real fast. Let me see. I'll let you finish, sorry, but then look at that right after.
Okay. So this, when everyone was here and we talked about it and we hashed it back and forth, it will not be in the AWS sync, which allows you to build a custom sync that does not include DNS. So we're offering an opt-out. So we'll build a separate sync module that just queries cartography for all the DNS records that we want to look up. We'll look up those DNS records and then we'll modify the nodes based on the results of the DNS query. But if you really didn't like that, then you could make a sync that doesn't include that step. The other option was to make a either implicit or opt-in or opt-out flag, but we decided that we do want most people to know about whether or not their DNS is configured correctly. So just thought I'd put in two options to have people think about. If they have any feedback, send it my way. I'll create, I guess, issues for both of these.
Yeah.
And tag some architecture docs to it.
Cool. Have you seen, okay, so when I was looking at our AWS DNS stuff, I remembered that me and you had this conversation, and I was very surprised actually to find that we have code that does DNS resolution. Did you click on the link yet?
I did.
Yeah, so like, and then I was trying to figure out, okay, wait, who put that in there? I thought it might have been you, and then I looked, no, it was from the very beginning.
Is it actually used though?
Yeah, that's a very good. It has to be, right? I don't know. So what I'm trying to say is that it may not be as radical of a departure as we initially thought. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I personally believe it belongs in core cartography in there with all of the AWS DNS stuff, but then you probably do need a flag, or at least to point out in our documentation. We try and keep the documentation that this thing is as benign as it comes. It's really just pulling metadata. It is possible that people think resolving a ton of DNS names is not as benign as it comes.
Yeah.
But to me, it's still pretty benign.
Let me see if I can find a usage of it. I can't find any usage of it. I don't know. This project is getting big. Like, I didn't even know this existed. It's a little embarrassing. Let me just open up cartography right now. Yeah, it'd be very good to find an example. Find in path, put that there. Get resolution by FQDN. Where is this?
Yeah, I mean, we already pull in the DNS Python library.
Well, looks like we got some new joiners. The ingest DNS record by FQDN. Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to go dig a little bit more into that later on, but the point is, it might not be as radical of a departure as you initially thought.
Okay. Well,
cool.
Just wanted to leave some people with something to think about.
Cool. Let's see. We got through the main parts of the agenda. For the newcomers that just joined on, if you don't mind, please go to the doc and then sign in your name, and then if you don't mind, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. My name's Terry. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yep. So I'm Terry. I'm on the Amazon Red team. We're considering cartography as one of our tools, so I wanted to come see what it was all about.
Awesome. And then, okay, so there was only one joiner. Okay, I thought that there was another one. Okay, cool. All right, we got through the main stuff, and then cool. I'm gonna go ahead and then I think the main stuff of the discussion kind of got wrapped up, so I'm gonna go ahead and then turn off the recording if that's good with you guys. Cool.